Okay, so where we left off yesterday, of course, was the CSS rule. And so the CSS rule that we were talking about yesterday was the class rule. So we went through everything. Remember, this first example was creating the checkerboard with the CSS rule. So you got that done. The next one was when you had to highlight that one row for the winner of the swim meet. That was just the example there. So we did that one yesterday. Any questions about that one? Okay. The next one was where we took our list of the things that we like to do on our daily favorites, and then we went in and colored each alternative line. We set 3 classes. First class was header, so we changed the header to green, and then the next header was, the next class was odd row, and we changed that color to the sandy brown. And so every odd row was the sandy brown color, and then the even row was the Indian red, okay? And then we took our endangered animals list and we changed all of the names endangered to red, and then the names of the animals that were threatened to the orange-red color. And then also we set another class for scientific name and changed the font style of that to italic. So all of the scientific names should be italic or italicized, okay? So that was the last one in class. Any questions about setting the class for CSS rule? Yes? Okay, hold on, I'll be right there. Come on, Tanner. You slacking, buddy? Okay, which one? You should have 3. Okay. Got scientific name. Yeah, because you named it that, that's right. Yep, that's what it is. Yep, because you found that. Sometimes it's just the smallest little thing, yep. Yeah, you just gotta make sure the name's met. Okay, yeah, that's one thing. The smallest little detail could cause your green check not to come up. So make sure, like, if you have any typos, everything's spelled the same and all that. Let's see what's going on. Okay, so just make sure that, you always make sure that you have the same, like if you wrote font color, you write font color. If you wrote font dash color, make sure it's font dash color. Everything has to make sure that it matches up. All right, so moving on to class ID, CSS select by ID. Let's go. So I'll move on to this next video. This one's kind of similar, but it just, the way you notate it is going to be a little different. So we'll start there.
Hi. In this video, we'll be learning about selecting by ID with CSS. So to recap, we've seen the general format for the CSS rule, selector, followed by curly braces, followed by property value for every property that you want to style for that selector. The selector defines which HTML elements this rule applies to. And there's many kinds of selectors. We've seen selecting by tag, so that this rule applies to all H1 elements. We've seen selecting by class, so that this rule applies to all HTML elements with a specific class. And now we'll be introducing selecting by ID. So selecting by ID makes it so that this rule applies to the single HTML element with a specific ID. Now this is very different from tag and class, because when we selected by tag, it applied to every element with that tag. When we selected by class, it applied to every HTML element with that class. But when we select by ID, it applies to only a single HTML element. It applies to the one element with that specific ID. So how do we have an ID on an HTML element? What does that mean? Well, introducing the ID attribute. So just like class, ID is an attribute that we can add to an HTML tag. Now the difference is that the class attribute styled a group of tags, but the ID attribute styles one specific tag. So we add an ID to a tag when we want to style that specific element. So for example, say we had a simple H1 element that said code HS. We could add the ID logo to that H1 tag, and this sets the ID attribute of this tag to be logo. Now an important note is that the ID of an element should be unique. There should be only one tag on any given web page with a specific ID. So if we were making a web page with this H1 tag that had the ID logo, this should be the only tag that has the ID logo. It is very specific to this tag. So when we're writing CSS rules that select by ID, we are writing a rule that applies to a single HTML element. This rule applies to the single element with the ID logo.
And again, logo, like when we did alert yesterday talking about class, logo is just the formality that they put on there. It can be the hashtag or pound symbol. It can be create. It can be imagine. Whatever it is, you just have to make sure those two things match up, and it's still the same way. It cannot begin with a number, and it cannot have any spaces in it. So that logo, you don't have to always put logo. It's just whatever word you're associating with that specific ID, and he's going to talk about that too.
To select by ID, we simply put a hashtag in front of the ID name. So we say hashtag logo, and then we define all the styles we want for that ID. So this rule says that the HTML element with the ID logo will have a font size of 60 pixels, and it will be red. Now, just like class names, ID names cannot have spaces, and they cannot start with a number. So both of these ID names would not be valid. The first one starts with a number, and the second one has a space. So to fix it, just put the number at the end and replace spaces with a dash. So logo2 is a valid name, and large dash logo is a valid ID name. So to see an example of this, here we have two H1 tags, CodeHS and Learn to Code, and only one of them has the ID logo. So if we were to add a CSS rule that styled the ID logo with a font family of Georgia, font size of 80 pixels, font style of italic, and a color of blue, it only applies to the CodeHS H1 tag. It only applies to the tag with the ID logo. Now, an important note here is that ID overrides the style of both class and tag in the case of a conflict. ID is the most specific type of style. So on the spectrum of CSS styling, at the least specific, we have selecting by tag. If we write a CSS rule that selects several elements by tag, that is a very general rule. Then we have selecting by class. If we write a CSS rule that selects by class, that is a bit more specific. That is applying to a smaller group of tags. If we select by ID, that is the most specific. That applies to only one tag. So a rule that selects by ID will overwrite rules that select by class or by tag. So to see an example of this, suppose we had three rules. One rule selects all p tags and gives them the color green. Another rule selects all tags with the class alert and gives them the color red. And the last one selects the HTML element with the ID logo and gives it a color of blue. Suppose we had this HTML element on our web page, a p tag with the text hello. What color do you think this element will be? If you said green, you would be correct. The first CSS rule selects this p tag and gives it the color green. Now, what if we added the class alert to this tag? Now what color would it be? Well, now we're going to have a color of red. And this is because the class style overrides the tag style. Even though it's selected by the p tag, it's also selected by the alert class. And the alert class will overwrite the green color and give it a red color. Now, what if we added on top of that the ID logo? Now what color would it be? Well, in this case, the tag would be blue. And this is because the ID style overrides both the tag style and the class style. ID is the most specific, so in case of a conflict, in case of several rules all applying to the same element, the ID rule takes the highest precedence.
Okay, so that's what he was saying. It's like the way that it's set up as importance. So if you just have a regular tag to style something, it'll take that. But then if you put in and you add the alert to the ID tag to something, that's how it goes. So class would come after the regular CSS, and then if there is an ID to that, that will override that. So that's why the hello end up being green and then also italic. But if you see how it's changed a little bit, that all of these are different CSS rules. So the color is one thing, the font size and the font style. So that's why it ended up being green 60 pixels and italic. Now, if the class were to change the color again, like in the first example, it wouldn't be green. It'd be whatever the color is for the class or for the ID. So that's what he's going to talk about as well.
Now, suppose there were no style conflicts. If the P only set the color, the class only set the size, and the ID only set the font style, now there's no conflicts, so all three styles will actually apply together. And there's no conflicts, so all three are able to be represented on the resulting web page. So let's see this in the editor. So here we have a simple web page with two H1 tags. One says code HS, and the other one says learn to code. Right now, we just have one CSS rule. It selects all H1 tags and gives them the color red. So this is selecting at the tag level. So if we run this, we should see code HS, learn to code, both in red. Now what we want to do is we want to use the ID and the class to give these more specific styles that apply to just this tag or just this tag. So for example, maybe we want to have all tags with the class code to have a font that looks like code. So to do that, we could select all HTML elements with the class code and give them a font family of Courier. Awesome. Now see, the color still applies. There's no conflict here. If we were to also say that the color should be black, now that has been overwritten. The class style overwrites the tag style. Now let's style the logo. We want the logo to be very big and fancy and stand out. So to select just that tag, to select just the logo, I will select hashtag logo for the ID logo. And let's give it a font size of 80 pixels. Let's give it a color of blue. Let's give it a font family of Georgia. And a font style of italic. Awesome. So now the ID style overwrote the tag style. We can see even if we added the class code to this tag, it would not be modified because the logo overwrites everything that the code does. The font family is overwritten and the color is overwritten. And lastly, maybe we want to style the description such that its font size is a little bit smaller. So what we can do there is select the description, give it a font size of 15 pixels. Great. So that is how we can use the ID attribute to select elements by ID and style them. Now it's your turn.
Okay, continue. All right, so it asks us here, which of the following CSS rules will select the HTML element with the ID logo and set the font size to the element to 60 pixels? So now he went through all of the different things that would style. So let's go through these. The first one is just logo with the open brackets and it says font size 60 pixels. Now remember, that was just regular CSS rule, that one did. The second one has the dot logo, and then inside 60 pixels. Remember, the dot stands for if we're gonna represent a class. So the next one has the hashtag or the pound sign logo, and then inside font size 60. So of course, whenever you see the hashtag or the pound sign in front of the actual, I guess, descriptor, you would consider that the ID for CSS, okay? All right, so check and let's continue. Submit your answer. All right, so the first thing they give us is this example. So hit run code. All right, so going down the line, this example here just shows us that in the style part here in the heading, that your H1 tag should be colored red. The dot code, so that, of course, the dot code there would stand for a class. So when they represent a class, the font family should be Courier. And then the next one on line 17, when they represent an ID, that means the color should be blue, the font size should be 80 pixels, the font family should be Georgia, and the font style should be italic. And then they put in another ID for description, and the color should be black. So if we head down to the body of the page, we'll see that on line 31, the H1 tag has an ID of logo. So even though on line number 9, H1 is styled to be the color red, but remember that the ID is going to override everything. So that's why if you look at your screen, you'll see that it's the color blue instead of red, okay? And then this 80 pixels, Georgia, and italic. And then if we go down to line number 35, even though this is another H1 tag, they have already put in the ID and the class. Remember that it goes in order from the regular CSS styling, and then to the class, then to the ID. So this one has an ID and a class CSS rule put in it, but it's gonna override anything else. ID comes first, so the description changes the color to black. So that's why the color is not blue, okay? And then comes in everything else. Class code, the font family turns to Courier, all right? So that means that this is the color black, and then the class code up here tells it to be Courier for the actual font, okay? Any questions about that? Everybody good on that one? Okay, so run code, we got that, hit continue. All right, so for our exercise, it says must do today. In this exercise, you'll practice styling elements by ID by selecting the most important thing to do today and making it big in red. The starter code, the given web page shows a to-do list for today. Your job, so what we have to do is pick a task that you think is the most important thing to do today. Give it the ID important. Then write a CSS rule that selects ID important and gives it the color red and font size 20 pixels, okay? So let's go, hit run code, what do we have? All right, so they've given us a list, an unordered list, so it's got the bullet points of things to do today. Go grocery shopping, play kickball, do math homework, walk the dog, and feed the dog. So our assignment is to create an ID important, and then select the thing that we think is the most important. All right, so if we go up to our page on line number 6, in between the style tag, is where we're gonna start our code. So on line number 6 is where we're gonna put in our ID, CSS ID. So remember, when we're doing ID, we're gonna use the hashtag symbol. And they want us to name this important. So on line 6, we're gonna put the hashtag and we'll put important. Okay? And remember, when we're putting things inside of a CSS rule, we're gonna use the curly braces. So open curly brace. And then on line number 7, what do they want us to do? They want us to give it a color red and a font size 20 pixels. Okay, we can do that. So color, then remember your colon, red, and semicolon. So we did the color, and now enter, and now we need to do the font size. So font dash size, colon, what did they say, 20 pixels, okay, 20 px, and your semicolon, and then enter, and then we're gonna close our curly braces. So now what we just did is set the ID, named it important, and the color's red, the font size is 20 pixels, okay? Questions? Okay, all right, so now it says that we are going to style the most important thing to do today. So you're gonna choose, what do you think the most important thing is to do on this list today? Go grocery shopping, play kickball, do math homework, walk the dog, or feed the dog. I'm gonna put do math homework as the most important thing. So I'm gonna go to line number 17, next to the LI. So it's the same the way we did class, but this time we're gonna type ID equals instead. And then your double quotations, and remember we named it important, so we're gonna type important. And close our double quotation. So remember, it doesn't matter what you name it, just making sure it matches up. So if I was to name my ID, think, as long as I put down at the bottom, think, when I name my ID, it's gonna match up, okay? So you have to make sure your words match up. And it cannot start with a number and it cannot have any spaces in it. So those are the only rules that you have to abide by. All right, so run code, let's see, did we do everything correctly? Yep, check our code. So we went in, added a ID, CSS ID of imported. And then we took the thing that we thought was the most important. In mine, I said I wanted do math homework to be the most important. And then once we ran that, it turned it to red. Questions? And our font size is 20 pixels. All right, run code. Make sure you have all of your green checks, submit and continue. All right, so we have another example here, or another exercise. It says this HTML page shows the menu for Lomi's Large Linguini Lounge. Create and use 2 CSS classes so that the font color of the vegetarian items is sea green and the font color of the section headers is Indian red. Great. Now assign the following IDs. The Penne al Forno should have the ID crowd favorite and a CSS rule to style it so that it is italic and the font is red. Hint, look into font style, okay? The tomato ganache has an ID new and a CSS rule to style so that the font color is orange. So it should look like what's there. Okay, we can do that. Hit let's go. Run code. So this is what we have here. So remember, you can always go back to assignment. All right, so created 2 CSS classes so that the font color of the vegetarian items is sea green and the font color of the class section headers is Indian red. All right, so what have they given us already? If you look on line 16, you'll see they have class vegetarian, class vegetarian, class vegetarian. So they have those things there. And let's see, they should have the other one, what line is that on? I'll call it the section headers. Anyway, okay, so we are on the style. So right now it has the style, anything with the body, within the body has a background color of Alice blue. So let's run code. Yep, it's got the Alice blue. So now we need to create our class that has the font color for vegetarian. So they already gave us the name vegetarian. So that's what we're gonna set our class to. So let's go to line number 10 and dot class, of course, because this is gonna be a class. I'm sorry, dot vegetarian, because this is a class. We use dot, remember? So dot vegetarian, because we're setting a class. And then in our curly braces, what did they want vegetarian to be? They wanted the color to be sea green. So color, after you put your curly brace, your open curly brace, color, colon, sea green, capital S and capital G, the lower camel case. Then your semicolon. And now close your curly braces. So now, once we run our code, we should see that all of the things that's vegetarian should turn that sea green. Okay, yep, we got it. Good. Questions about that? Okay. All right, the next thing, create, let's see, the font color of the section headers needs to be Indian red. All right, so we're creating another class. So we're gonna go down to line number 13. And let's just name this header, so dot header. And what do they want it to be? Indian red. So they want the color, Indian red, so color, colon, capital I for Indian, capital R for red, our semicolon, and then we'll close our curly braces. All right, so what we did was just declare our CSS rule for our class for the name header. And so for this one, they want all section headers to be red. So section header, the first section header is where on line 19 where it says Lomi's Large Linguine Lounge. That's where we'll put our first class. So class equals your quotation, and we named it header. Okay, and close your quotation. And then on line 24 where it says today's soups, that's another header. So we need to put our class there too. Class equals header. Okay. And then our last header is on line 30, today's pasta. And we're gonna put class there too. Header. Okay, so now let's run our code. And yep, we got that. Okay, so what's next? What do we have to do now? All right, so now we have to set our IDs. Any questions before I move on? Any questions? So everybody good with what I did? If you can see up here on the board, we added in the class vegetarian. So we put the dot vegetarian, and they had already put it in for the vegetarian there. So all we had to do was create the class for it. All right, good. And then the next thing, it asked us to go in and do the font color for all the vegetarian items, sea green. So that's what we did. Add our color, sea green, the vegetarian. And then we had to make one more CSS class to create a section header for Indian red. So we did that. We called it header.header, color Indian red. And so everything that we put on our header, so line 19, 24, and 30 have header, and those turn to Indian red. Questions? Okay, everybody good? So now when we run our code, all of our headers should be red. All right, so let's go to the next thing. Yes. Okay. I think so. Go back. 25. What does it say you did do? Hang tight for 1 second, let me catch up here, okay? Okay, so, the next thing we gotta do is just add our 2 IDs to that. Okay, so, for our assignment, here we go. We need to make an ID that has crowd favorite and new. All right, so we're gonna go to line number 16, and then remember, it's the hashtag for the ID, and we're gonna call that crowd favorite. Okay, and crowd favorite, we're gonna open our curly braces. What do they want crowd favorite? Add CSS rule to, let's see. Okay, so color is red, okay. And then it said the font style is italic. Okay, let's see, is there anything else in there? Nope. All right, so now we can close our curly braces. And so crowd favorite is gonna go towards the Penne Alfarno, which is on line number, where are we? Okay, line number 26. So, where it says the Penne Alfarno, we're gonna add in the ID equals your double quotation, and we call that crowd dash favorite, and close your double quotations, okay? And then the last ID we need to make is called new. So we're gonna go to line number 20 and add in our hashtag new, okay? And then our curly braces inside of new, font color should be orange. Sorry, color, colon, orange, semicolon, and then close our curly braces. And then that goes under tomato ganache, and that's on line 35. So then we'll add in our ID equals new. Okay, so let's run code, check code. Okay, so I got the same problem that you got, TJ. So let's see. it says the H2 tag should be Indian red. So our H2 tags, which we called, class header, should be color Indian red. Let's see, let's make sure. Did it want us to name it a specific name? Huh. That's weird. All right, All right, I'm just gonna have to go back and check that out, because we have our header correct in our class header. Indian red, Let's see, maybe it wants us to have its own class. Maybe that's the problem. Let me check that out. Let's see. We'll name this one header 2. So header 2, header 2. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, we'll leave it there. I'll go back and check that to see why. Is everybody getting that same error or not turning green?
Which one?
For, when it tells you that your H2 tag should be Indian red?
No, I finished mine.
Okay, let's see what yours did differently. Go back to 5.
I am.
You're still on
the
it?
menu?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so you didn't. Okay. So that's what you did. Let's see, check code. Okay, so we can do that then. All right, so evidently what they want us to do is just have an H2 tag, even though when you click on the assignment here, it says that to create and use 2 CSS classes, so that the font color of the vegetarian items is sea green and the font color of the section headers is Indian red. However, from Ben's, looking at Ben just went in, created a CSS rule for H2, and then turned the color to Indian red. So let's do that. Let's add that in. So we'll go to line number 23, and so H2, and your open curly braces, and it says to put our color Indian red, and then our semicolon, and let's close those curly braces. All right, so go back to your H2 line and take the class out. I'm not sure why. I'm gonna go back and look at that and see why that, it's kind of like a misunderstanding as far as what they wanted us to do. Because the directions clearly say to use 2 CSS classes, but when we do it this way, then we can get all our checks. All right, so TJ, go back and on your line 40 for H2 and line 34, take out the class.
I got it.
Okay, you got it? Okay, anybody else had that problem? Okay, all right, so check code, there we go. So submit and continue. All right. All right, so the last example that's coming up is we're going to use our endangered animals again, and we're gonna add pictures. Let's see. Copy over the HTML for the endangered animals web page you started in the last lesson. Okay, we'll do that in a second. You will add pictures to your page now. Under each animal's list, add a picture of the animal. If you cannot find a picture of the exact animal, find a picture of a closely related animal. Be sure to cite any pictures that you use. Then give each image an ID. So remember, the ID is the hashtag symbol. Remember that ID should be unique. Using the IDs, give each picture a different border using border style attribute. Look in docs for some values you can give to the border style. All right, so these are just some examples over here. So hit let's go. Oh, we gotta copy and paste. So go back, click on that link, and it should take you to what you did before. All right, so we're gonna copy and paste all of that. Go back here, paste our code. There we go. And run code. All right, so we have a little bit of kind of homework to do. So we need to find pictures of these animals. So let's find a picture of the lowland anoa. So you can just copy and paste the name. And then go to image. And we get a picture, okay. What's the second one? Mountain anoa. Copy, paste. Get a picture of this guy. All right, giant sable antelope. Okay, get a picture of this guy. Okay. And then the last one, argali. We're gonna get a picture of that one. All right, there we go. So we got our 4 pictures. So our assignment, what we have to do, add pictures to our page. Under each animal's list, add a picture of the animal if you cannot find a picture of the exact animal. All right, so remember, we did images a way long time ago in HTML, but if you forget how to add them, if you click on the Docs tab and go to HTML, under HTML images, you click on images. Remember, your image has the source code. So we're gonna add our first image on line number 36 under the unordered list for the lowland anoa. And so remember, in that, our tag is gonna be the image and then the source, src, equals, and then when we're copying and pasting, remember, whatever picture it is you choose, you have to right-click, copy image address. Most of you probably are using Chrome, or if you see copy image link, but copy image address should come up if you're using Chrome. If not, like I'm using Edge, so copy image link is what I'm going to copy. And then within those double quotations, I'm gonna paste that link to that picture. And don't forget, after the double quotations, to close your bracket. All right, so now when I run my code, I should have the picture of the lowland anoa there, yes. Okay, questions? All right, so we're gonna do that for the other ones as well. So on line 43, we're gonna add the image of the mountain anoa. So image, then our source equals, let's get the image of the mountain anoa. Or is that what I did? No, they look alike. Copy image link or copy image address, and I'm gonna put that link there. Remember to close my curly bracket, my break bracket. So now I should have my 2 pictures, yep, okay. The next one is the giant stable. Okay, I'm gonna copy my image address. So let's go down to line number, 50. This is where we're gonna add our image, our source equals, remember your double quotations, and paste that address in there. Okay, run code. So now let's see if I got my 3 images. Yep, got my 3 images. So one more of the Argali. We'll use this guy here. Copy image address. Let's go to line number 57. This is where we're gonna add our image. Our source equals double quotation. There we go. Don't forget to close your bracket there. Run code, let's make sure. Yep. Okay, so we got our 4 images. All right, so the next thing I want you to do, for our assignment. All right, so you'll add pictures to the page. Under each animal's list, we wanna add a picture of the animal. If you cannot find a picture, we did that. All right, then give each image an ID. Remember, the ID should be unique. All right, so what I wanna do also, make sure that our length, our width and our height are the same for all of our pictures. So after the image source, remember, when we are adding things into our, for our image, we gotta put everything within those double quotations, or put a space and then whatever we want. So like width, we want the width to be equal to 200 pixels. Okay? So we're gonna do that for each of them so that we can make sure that, so that we can, have all the same size. So you can copy and paste that width. Here we go, we'll put it here on line number 43, then we'll put it next to this image, because we want all our images to be the same size before we proceed. So run code. All right, there we are. So now all of our images are the same size, okay? So all I had to do was go back within that image tag and change, just put the width to be 200 pixels, okay? Questions? All right, so now this is where we need to give our ID. And so our ID, it says, should be unique. And it says, using the IDs, give each picture a different border using the border style attribute. Look in the docs for some values for border style. So let's look in docs and let's see if you go on that 3rd column under CSS properties and find where it says border. These are all of the different types of border things that we can do. You can make your border color, width, style, size, all those different things there. So it says for our assignment, it says give each picture a different border using the border style. Okay, so I think I want to do colored borders around mine. So give each image an ID. Remember that ID should be unique. All right, so the first ID, so your hashtag, we're gonna call this one blue border. Blue dash border. Okay? And then we are going to put our curly brace. And so for our blue border, we want border. Remember, under docs, it tells us all the different things that we can have. So I want for mine to have a border color of blue and a border style of, let's say size, we're gonna play around with that. So border color, I want, I'm not typing anything, here we go. Border color, I want to be blue. Okay, and then I want my, border style. To be double, okay? And then I want my border width, border width. To be 20 pixels. Let's see how big that is. I don't know how big that's gonna show up, but we will see. And then, all right, close my brackets. All right, so I would like for the first picture of my Lower Land ANOA on line 41 to have the class ID equals, what do we name it? Blue border. Okay, let's see. Yep, there we go. All right, so let me go back to here, what I did. So for our directions, it says to give each image an ID. Remember that ID should be unique. Using the IDs, give each picture a different border using the border style attribute. Okay? So what did I do? I went to, I called mine, my ID blue border. So you'll see blue border here. And then I wanted my border color to be blue. I wanted my border style to be double, and I wanted the width to be 20 pixels. I was playing around with the width because I didn't know how thick 20 pixels would be, but it looks fine to me. All right, so what happened? I went down to the first one, Lowland ANOA, and in the image, I added my ID before, after image, but before the source, ID equals blue border, the same as what I put up here. And then now, my Lowland ANOA has the blue double border. Okay? Questions? Everybody good on that one? No questions? Okay. All right. So now we have to do it for the other 3 pictures as well. I want to kind of keep, I like for things to look uniform. So I want to kind of keep the same theme going on with the double border, but I'm going to change the colors. So I'm just going to basically copy mine here and then paste it, but I'm going to change the color now to red border. And I'm going to change the color to from blue to red. So now my second picture, which is going to be on line number 53, now I'm going to type in ID equals red border. Okay, close my double quotation. So now when I run my code now, the new one should have a red border, okay? So like I said, I like to keep the same kind of theme going on, but I'm going to change the color. So now this next one on line 35, I'm gonna change that to purple border. And then I'll do the last one, yellow border. So purple border, and then I'm gonna go down to line number 65 and add in my ID equals purple border. And close my quotation. So now run code, I should have a purple border up. Why Why is it red? Oh, because I didn't change the color. So you gotta remember to change the color, sorry. From red to purple. There we go. So I changed it to purple, run code. All right. All right, so like I said, the last one I'm gonna do yellow border. So I'm gonna copy again, paste, and so this one's gonna be called yellow. And remember to change your color, don't do like I did. All right, so now the last one, we're gonna go to line 77, type in ID equals yellow, double quotations, yellow, border. Okay, and run code. And now let's pop it out, see? Yep, okay, so now I've got blue, they're all different, blue, red, purple, and yellow. Well, they're all the same kind of design, but different. I like for mine to look a little uniform on my page. All right, so. Each image has a unique border style. We did that. All right, so what did we do? We went in and we added so that's not it. So under each list, we went in and added a picture. The picture of our animals. We got that. The next thing, it says, find a picture that give each image an ID. Remember that ID should be unique using the IDs. Give each picture a different border using the border style attribute. Look at the docs for some of the values you can give your border style, okay? So what we did, we added border color. So we had a blue border, red border, purple border, and yellow border. They're all different names, all different colors, but they have kind of the same theme going on. Okay, so remember to add your ID, yellow border, I did, purple border, red border for our images, we got that. Yep, we are good. Okay, so run your code, make sure yours has different borders around it. And I'm not sure why the last one, okay, because they wanted to have it unique. Well, double. If you want to change yours to the different ones, so you can have, for your border style, like double, dotted, and they have, what's another one, dashed, and then solid. So when I change that, now my images change, so now you see the top one has the double border, then I have the dotted, then I have the dash, and then I have the solid down at the bottom. Okay? Questions about that? Please let me know now before we move on. Everybody good? All right, so hit submit and continue. All right, one last thing for today. It's called the cascade. So I'll close these out. And
Hi, in this video, we'll be talking about the CSS cascade. So, question is, what happens when two CSS rules conflict? Oftentimes, whether on purpose or by mistake, we'll have multiple CSS rules that apply to the exact same element. And how does CSS decide which one wins? So, introducing the cascade. The cascade is the set of rules that defines which CSS rules win in the case of a conflict. So without the cascade, CSS would really just be conflicting style sheets. A lot of times we have multiple CSS rules that are fighting over which rule will actually apply. So in this scenario, we have an H1 tag with the class logo, and we have two rules, one applying to the H1 tag, one applying to the class logo. So here the H1 rule is saying, well, I want this element to be blue. And the logo rule is saying, well, I want this element to be red. Who's going to win? Well, this is where the cascade comes in. We get rid of the conflict, and instead we're using cascading style sheets. So the cascade comes in and says, quit fighting, you two. I'm going to pick the winner. In this case, the logo class wins, and it shall be red, and that is final. Stop fighting. So in the case of multiple rules conflicting, CSS cascades from the least important rules to the most important rules, applying the rules as it goes. So at the end of it, the most important rules win out. So now the question is, how do we determine which rules are the most important? Well, the cascade looks at a lot of different things to determine the final winner. Let's see what the cascade considers important. How does the cascade work? Well, there are three factors that go into the cascade. First off is the importance of the rule. Second is the specificity. And the third is the physical order that the rules are written in. So the most important factor is the rule importance, and the least important factor is the order that they're written in. Now, what do we mean by each of these? Well, for the importance factor, we're really just looking at, does the rule include the important modifier, which we'll get to in a second. For the specificity factor, we'll look at how specific the rule is. So for example, selecting by ID is a more specific rule than selecting by class, and selecting by class is a more specific rule than selecting by tag. And lastly, if two rules have the exact same importance and the exact same specificity, the tiebreaker is the order that the rules are written in. Rules written later in the file win out over rules written earlier. Let's dive in and see some examples of each of these. So the first and most important factor is the importance of the rule. Now there is a special modifier that makes a rule more important, and it's simply exclamation point important. So if we have these two rules, the first one saying all p tags will be red, and the second one saying the element with ID text should have the color blue. Well, in this case, the p tag with ID text is going to be blue because the ID rule is more specific than the p rule. But if we add the important modifier to the p rule, now this is the one that wins because it's the most important. Adding the important modifier overrides the more specific ID style. Now this rule is the most important and it will win. However, if we make them both important, if both have the same importance, then the more specific rule wins. So here the ID rule would win because they're both important. Now let's look at specificity. So in general, it goes from selecting by tag being the least specific to selecting by ID being the most specific. The smaller the group of tags is that you're generally applying the rule to, the more specific it is. So selecting by tag is very unspecific, selecting by class is medium specific, and selecting by ID is the most specific. So ID style overwrites both the class style and the tag style in the case of a conflict because it's the most specific type of style. So for example, if we have these three rules, p tags will be green, tags with the class alert will be red, and elements with the ID logo will be blue, what's going to happen? These are all conflicting. So if we have a p tag, what color will this be? Well, the only rule that applies to this is the p rule, so this will be green. Now, if we add the class alert, now we have a conflict. The p is saying it should be green, the alert is saying it should be red. So in this case, the alert wins because class is more specific than tag. The class style overrides the tag style. Now we're going to add the ID logo. So now they're all conflicting. P saying green, alert saying red, and logo saying blue. What's going to happen? Well, in this case, it will be blue because ID style overrides both tag style and class style because it's more specific. However, if we change these up so that they're not conflicting, CSS is actually going to cascade down from the least specific to the most specific and apply the rules as it goes. So first it's going to apply the color green, then it's going to apply the font size 60, then it's going to apply the font style italic, and since none of them actually conflict, all three styles will apply. And the last tiebreaker is order. So if we have two rules that are conflicting, this first rule is saying the p tag should be red, the second rule is saying that it should be blue. In this case, the rule written later wins. So in the case where two rules have the exact same importance and the exact same specificity, the order determines the winner and the later rule wins. So that is the cascade. That's how we resolve conflicts among our CSS rules. Let's see some examples of this in the editor. All right, so here we have an HTML page with a single H1 tag and a P tag whose ID is description. Now, according to these CSS rules, the H1 will be green, the P will be blue, but anything with the ID description will be red. So what's going to happen here? Well, the text is red. That's because the ID style wins. It is more specific than the P style. So these two are conflicting. However, if we really cared about this and we wanted this to be the most important rule, we can simply add the important modifier by typing exclamation point important And now this will be the most important rule in the cascade. So we run this again, we see that the P rule, one, because it was important, this text normally be colored red, but importance modifier makes this text blue. So that is how we can use the important modifier to make a specific rule very important. Now let's look at the order precedence. Here we only have a couple rules and a couple tags. We have an H1 tag with the class big, a P tag with class alert, and a P tag with class alert in the ID blue text. So currently, CSS is cascading down from the most general rules to the most specific rules. So first it'll apply the color purple to the H1 tag, then it'll apply the font size 40 from the big class. Those don't conflict, so it's fine. However, if we added color red here, now this is going to win in the conflict because it's more specific. We can get rid of that. All right, let's add some styles to the P. So we're gonna say P tags should all be colored blue. If we do this, awesome, we see that they're blue. But now we're gonna say, okay, if you have the class alert, you're actually gonna have the color red. Oh, hold on. Color red. So now both of these are red because they both have the class alert. Lastly, if we have the ID of blue text, we're going to give it a color of blue. There we go. Let's actually make this green so we can see the difference. So here, neither of these P tags are green because the first one is overwritten by the class, the second one's overwritten by the ID. Now, what if we had multiple rules for the same ID? So down here we said blue text is actually going to have the color purple. Now this is going to be purple because this rule was written later. Likewise, if we have an alert rule written later with the color orange, this is now going to be orange because this one takes precedence. They have the exact same specificity, they have the exact same importance, but since this one was written later, it takes precedence. In general, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't write rules that are selecting the exact same elements in the same style file. But if we ever have that conflict, this is how it will resolve the conflict. So that is how the cascade resolves conflicts among CSS rules. Now it's your turn to dive in and give it a try.
Alrighty, so basically he was just talking about the order of importance and how conflicts are resolved. Because sometimes you can have some conflicts to where you might have a ID that styles it one color, a class that styles it another color, but what comes first? What's the most important? Alright, so the three questions that it asks us is, what is the function of cascade in CSS? So, of course, cascade makes it able to determine which CSS rule will be applied when multiple rules are in effect. Because sometimes, like I said, you might have a rule that says that if you have this specific alert, it needs to be this color. If you have this specific ID, it needs to be this color. So it just depends on the precedence or the importance of that specific CSS rule. All right, so that's what the cascade is important. The next one asks you true or false in the case of the two conflicting rules have the same order and specificity, the rule that was written first will be applied. So of course that's false. He said that the rule that was the one that was created last will be applied. So not the first one, the one that was the most current is which one is going to be applied. And then so the very last question, in what order does the cascade look at factors to determine which CSS rules to follow? So of course, whatever is important, because remember, if we were to designate one of the tags as important, that is the one that would get done first. So it doesn't matter, everything else gets thrown out the window. If it says important, then that's what goes next. And then of course, the specificity is whichever one is more specific. So if it's just a tag CSS rule, that comes first. But then if you have a class, that overwrites the tag, and then if you have an ID, that overwrites the class. So that's the order it goes in, because those are more specific. And then the last one, of course, is the order. So if I had an alert, let's say a class alert, and the color is supposed to be red, then I put a class alert and the color changed to blue. Whatever one I wrote last comes first, okay? So that one is the last one there. There we go. Submit. Let's go to the next part. All right, so example. Run code. All right, so if you see in this example, this is what he was talking about, how things work. You see that the text for the P is blue, even though it has an ID for description to be red. They classified blue as important, so that's why the text is blue. Okay, run code, continue. That's just an example. One more example. The order of precedence. So if you hit run code, this is the other one that he was talking about. So all the H1 tags should be purple. So if you see down here, even though it has a class big, the class big only changes the font size, so it does not override the purple color, because H1 tag, they don't conflict, okay? So the orange, whereas the P tag for the alert, you see that the second one is gonna override the first one, even though, like you said, this is really not common, people really don't do this, but just in case, that the red alert is gone, because now the new alert takes precedence over the first one, okay, of the original one. All right, so let's continue so we can do our 2 exercises before we go. All right, so step 1, first create a CSS rule that every LI tag has the font size of 20 pixels. Run the code and note the difference it makes. Then step 2, using what you know about CSS rule precedence, create a class named dairy and use it to make the list elements milk and cheese have the font size of 30. All right, so we can do that. So let's run code, let's see what we have. Okay, we just have food I need, milk, bread, cheese, tea, lettuce, and apples. So first, it says create a CSS rule that every LI tag has a font size of 20 pixels. Okay, so let's do that. So we're just gonna basically create a regular, within style, so on line number 7, just create an LI tag. And what does it want us to do? Font size 20, and I'm not typing anything. Okay, there we go. Font size, colon, and we want 20 pixels, semicolon, and close that bracket. So now run code, that's what they wanted to do, and see the difference. Okay, now it got bigger. All right, so now step 2, using what you know about CSS rule precedence, create a class named dairy and use it to make the list elements milk and cheese have the font size of 30. Easy peasy. All right, so on line 10, we're gonna create a class. So remember, the class has a dot, and they want us to name it dairy, so dot dairy. And within that, we want it to do our font size, colon, and what did they say, 30 pixels. And we're gonna put our semicolon there and close our curly brackets. Good. All right, so now we just have to put milk and cheese. So next to milk, line item number 20, remember we're gonna put our class equals, what do we name it? Dairy. Close our double quotations. And then on cheese as well. So class equals dairy. Okay. And close our double quotations. Now, let's see, those should be bigger than the other 2. Yep, milk and cheese. All right, let's check our code. All right, any questions? Those were easy. All right, so submit and continue. One last, excuse me, one last example. All right, so this web page has a table of games. The style rules have already been given to you. Assign the game class to the game elements in your table and add the ID favorite to your favorite game. All right, so let's go. Okay, so the board game, we have Settlers of Catan, Monopoly and Checkers, number of players 362, who owns the game? All right, so what I want us to do first is assign the game class to all the game elements in your table and add the ID favorite to your favorite game. All right, so game class, they have already declared it at the top. You see that? The background should be orange and the color should be white of the font. All right, so it says that it wants us to apply that to all of the game elements in our table. If you look at the table, all the game elements are under board game names. So you'll see Monopoly, Checkers, and Settlers of Catan. So we need to go to those names, which is on, excuse me, line number 28, line number 33, and line number 39. So the first thing, of course, we have to add the class game to each of those. So on line 28, we're adding the class, what's the name? Game. Okay, so that's 28. Then to Monopoly, we have to do the same thing, class, game. And then to Checkers, we have to do the same thing, class, game. Okay, so now when we run our code, all those elements should be orange. Good. Now it says the last thing, we're going to add the ID favorite to your favorite game. If you look up at the top, they have already declared favorite with the background color of green. So you're gonna choose your favorite game, whatever yours is. Mine personally is gonna be Checkers. So since Checkers already has, well, my favorite game already has a class, remember we can put in an ID equals, and we want that to be called favorite. And remember, since ID overrides class, when I run my code, Checkers should turn green because ID is gonna overtake or take precedence over the class. So run code, there we go. Okay, questions? So run your code, make sure you have all your green checks. Okay, submit and continue. And this is where we will stop. So, any questions about anything? I'm going to, right now the quiz is locked. I will unlock that and you'll be able to take that, we'll do that Monday. You take that Monday morning when you come in. But are there any questions about anything we covered today? So HTML is down. This week we did the CSS. So remember, everybody's, here we go. Everybody's code HS should look like mine. The only reason your 2.5 should not be should not be green is because of the fact that we didn't use the Wikipedia links. You guys couldn't use those. So all of this should be done. Those grades actually have been put in already. So for CSS, because next week, after you take your quiz Monday, you're gonna be starting on your project. And so all of this should be green. I'm not sure why mine here is not. So let's see. Next. Okay, continue. I wonder why it's not turning. Well, anyways, I'm not sure why it's not turning mine green like it's supposed to. Okay. And submit and continue. Okay, I'm just gonna have to check that out while it's not turning it green. But everything should be green. The quiz is locked for right now. I'm gonna unlock that. You'll take that Monday. And then next week, you'll be working on your project where you're creating your own homepage using the HTML and CSS that we have talked about. And then moving on to advanced HTML and CSS. Probably after the break, but you'll spend some time next week working on your home pages. Any questions from anybody? Okay. Alrighty, so tomorrow, please remember that you gotta log in during our class time. I'm only gonna give you about 30 minutes at the most to log in. Don't take an hour. I'm not gonna be sitting there just waiting for you to log in. So please make sure you log in at our class time. The Zoom link will be up there for you on our Canvas page. If you have any problems, technical difficulties, anything happens, just send me a Canvas message so I can have that documented for you as well. Okay?